Hey girl, Marissa here. You are listening to the Codependent Dummy podcast. As a young woman, you have been raised, reinforced, and rewarded for putting the needs of others above your own. Now, in your 20s, you're finding yourself exhausted, exasperated, and enveloped in shit relationships, especially the one you have with yourself. Codependency is a way of being where we put the feelings, wants, and needs of others above our own in an unconscious attempt to meet our own feelings, wants, and needs. Sorry to break it to you, sis, but that is not sustainable. This podcast is to help you undo all that so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. Let's get to it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Codependent podcast. Today, I'm sitting with Jackie Schreiber. Jackie is an associate marriage and family therapist. She received her master's degree from Antioch University and is pursuing a PhD from Pacifica Graduate Institute. Jackie previously worked as a business consultant and for the past 16 years has done process work to heal from her family of origin. Jackie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Marissa.
All right, so we'll start with the typical 2 questions. First and foremost, Jackie, how do you conceptualize the term codependency?
Well, I thought I would use the APA, the American Psychological Association definition first, and then we can talk a little bit more about it. But according to the APA, it's a state of being mutually reliant. For example, a relationship between 2 individuals who are emotionally dependent on each other. And then the second half of this definition is a dysfunctional relationship pattern in which an individual is psychologically dependent or controlled by a person who has a pathological addiction, such as alcohol or gambling. So, to put it in terms we can all relate to, codependency is really when we bond with another in a way that fills our underdeveloped or undeveloped parts of ourselves. And I always use the imagery, it's kind of like when 2 people each have a sprained ankle and then they lock arms and then they're hobbling along on their crutches. Right. Can't get very far in that way.
Right. And I'm curious, in what ways have you, how would you describe underdevelopment or undeveloped? What tends to be underdeveloped when we enter into these codependent bonds?
So in therapy and in psychology, we tend to view life as a process and we develop along the way, right? So, childhood, adolescence, adult or early adulthood all have different stages of development. And at each one of those stages, things happen in life, right? Parental issues, family of origin issues, social things, cultural things. So all of this can affect our development. So in my work, we don't necessarily blame the individual. We look at the whole system that the individual has been a part of. And we look at where could they have developed this skill set, but couldn't for whatever reason, or where could they have developed resiliency here, but couldn't or didn't for whatever reason. And then we look at those reasons.
What are these skill sets that we might have missed?
So one of the things I like to look at when I'm working with clients is something called attachment theory. And attachment is about our caregivers, our early experiences with our caregivers. And there's some evidence to suggest that this experience even is prenatal, right? As we're developing in the womb, there are all kinds of factors involved and it's complex. And so as therapists, we take a look at that complexity and we try and work with identifying, again, where, in attachment theory, maybe there was insecure attachment from the mother. And so during brain development, there's all kinds of new information about, neurology and how our brains form, etc. Again, complex, but basically we're looking at the early attachment with our caregiver and where kind of the way we relate to loved ones develops, what that looks like. And so if we don't, when we, are with our mother primarily, or a primary caregiver, when we don't have the opportunity to have this reciprocal relationship, and we call it mirroring in psychology, when that isn't present, then that part of ourselves may not develop.
Right.
We're very reliant.
Yes.
We're very reliant and very vulnerable as infants and as children. And this is where we learn the patterns.
Yeah, definitely. So typical number 2, Jackie, do you have a codependent experience or relationship from your own life that you can share with us?
I wasn't codependent because there was nothing for me to depend on. There wasn't anything for me to attach to. Now, that sounds a little extreme, but I mean emotionally. I mean emotional attachment. So that there has to be some type of emotional attachment that someone can lock into in order for a codependency to occur. I wanted to bring up the term enmeshment also. So, there's codependency, again, when we're kind of locking in those undeveloped aspects of ourselves. But enmeshment is when we actually fuse with another. We actually fuse our identity, and then we're not able to develop autonomously.
Right.
So, so in working with clients, it's important to look at, again, is there enmeshment, and where are they locked in?
Right.
And same with the codependency. Where's the locking in? And it has to be kind of a mutually agreed upon, relationship where you're fulfilling something in another and they're fulfilling something within you.
Right.
We want to kind of gently, challenge that and kind of pull that apart, and then help the client to develop that within themselves, right, what they felt they were lacking.
And would you say, Jackie, that enmeshment is totally separate, or if it's on a spectrum, if codependency is on a spectrum, it's just like a more intense form?
Yeah, I would say that actually. Enmeshment is when, again, the codependency is kind of like this, enmeshment is like this.
Right.
Is the best visual I can explain. Enmeshment is almost like you don't move without the other person. And then codependency is you guys are kind of moving together.
Yeah. So going back to you're like, well, I didn't have anything to attach to. Sounds like early on. So no codependent experience or relationship since.
No, but the reason I went into enmeshment is there was some of that. And that's, the mother-daughter relationship and potentially the father-son relationship. Although I will say in the father-son relationship, there is more of an emphasis on autonomy placed on the male relationship. Whether that's healthy or not depends, but there is more autonomousness placed on that. So, but with women, I think we're kind of conditioned to want to, attach, which is healthy. It's healthy to attach. Where it becomes unhealthy, again, is when our development is precluded by the relationship.
Say more about that. Our development is precluded. by the relationship.
Right. So, in other words, we're reliant on someone else's connection to us to form our identity or to present our identity. And then it's not coming from that place of authenticity. I've worked with many women who can't get through a session without mentioning their husband or their partner. And in fact, I have a great example. Are you familiar with the movie Runaway Bride?
Yes.
With Julia Roberts?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, decades old movie or whatever, but I think it's a really good example for your members who are interested in learning more about what this looks like. Julia Roberts in this movie, she doesn't know how she likes her eggs, right? That's part of the plot line. And she gets involved in these relationships and she's not developed enough sense of herself that she's just going along with whatever the fiance wants. She's mountain climbing or, something like that. She's doing all these things that aren't authentically interesting to her. And then eventually, Richard Gere is the leading man, and he's saying, well, how do you take your eggs? And she doesn't know. So she has to go find how she likes her eggs until she can come into a mutually beneficial partnership. So again, when I go back to stages, this isn't about, oh, I didn't develop properly, or I don't, this is about these stages of discovery, of self-discovery. So when we're in a relationship that's filling those places within ourselves, that's how it precludes our development. We're not discovering what our interests are. We're just kind of turning it over to our partner, so to speak.
Right.
And the other aspect of the movie, which I think is interesting, is her family system was enabling her in terms of continuously getting into these relationships and then getting out of them. And there was a scene in there which was quite telling where she was kind of being humiliated. So again, it's important to kind of evaluate our family story, our family system, to say, how are they enabling this codependency? How are they supporting me staying small, if you will, or staying undeveloped, or staying without exploring myself?
Right.
There can be some comfort in this. And that's another aspect of therapy, is we have to look at, where is the client finding comfort in this, even though it's dysfunctional? And we have to be very gentle in evaluating that process and helping the client disengage.
Right. Yeah. Okay, well, we're already starting to talk about some of your specialties. So thinking about, women and their sometimes conditioning to be codependent, what are common challenges that women face today that you've observed, and how do they relate to codependency?
So one of the things I want to mention first and foremost is, at no other time in history have there been demands for our attention. There are so many ways that we can escape, that we can, avoid, doing this type of work, looking within ourselves. And so I think out of everything, first and foremost, is we have to be able to, again, disconnect from all of the chatter in the world. We have to be able to kind of sit with ourselves, take time to go within. So that's one of the top things. Women typically are, as we talked about, conditioned to give. And there comes a certain point, typically in a woman's life, when she hasn't had the opportunity to experience balance. She'll at some point she'll pull back. She may have to. I've worked with many women who have become ill because they were giving and not taking the time to kind of refresh themselves. And it's we use the the gas tank example or the oxygen mask example. You have to fill your own tank so the car can keep going, or, you have to put on your own oxygen mask so that you can assist others.
Right.
So it's that ability to be able to pull out of whatever is demanding of our time.
Right.
And yes, the conditioning is there for women as the caretakers, again, to just keep giving without reciprocity in a lot of cases.
Right. How do you sense that does or doesn't relate to codependency?
Again, just being hold on, because I can't, for whatever reason, Marissa, I can't think of the word. What is the word that I want? It's shoot. It's okay, can you ask me the question again, and maybe this will jog the word forward?
Yeah. So reflecting on the first challenge you mentioned, how does our demands for attention relate to codependency?
It provides the opportunity to not have to face it, to not look at it. We can kind of hide from what's going on for us.
Right.
And we can busy ourselves. So it often seems like taking that time to really look at ourselves, evaluate what's happening, or even to go within to discover the missing parts or the missing pieces or the places that don't feel comfortable inside. It's difficult sometimes to look at those areas. And so we want to distract ourselves. We want the distraction. I had a client just last week who said, she feels dead inside. And so her and her husband's relationship is quite codependent for many reasons. It's serious reasons in one respect, in terms of, where they live and financial and so forth. So again, when we look at this, we want to take all of these circumstances into account. Right. But yeah, I think it's the distraction and that comfort, the comfort in the distraction. I'd rather watch, Hallmark Channel than think about, where I'm not feeling so good inside.
Yeah, it's true. And it's twofold, because the distraction, like you said, is readily available. And also part of us wants it. Right. So yeah, it's hard to to remain distracted from oneself if, there's nothing to do, but there's always something to do.
Always find something to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Until I think until there's usually some type of trigger, some type of kind of breaking point where it's no longer, we're no longer able to use the distraction. Things come to a point in time where we have to say, okay, this isn't working. And I have to figure out, what's next.
Right. Thoughts on these other challenges, right? How we're conditioned to give, conditioned to be caretakers. And right, I can assume how and why it does contribute to codependency, but for you, Jackie, how do you sense it contributes?
I've had clients, again, going back to kind of the mother-daughter relationship, I've had clients where a lot of times this will come back to the fact that the mother is herself wounded in some way. And she's maybe using the child to fill aspects of herself. And this is kind of the ground zero of where, the codependency and the enmeshment can take place. Mothers are using their daughters to live, essentially, have their own identity, live through their identity. In fact, another movie, which is an incredible example of this, is Like Water for Chocolate. It's an old film, but in the Latina culture, women are expected to take care of their mothers. And this movie is so intense in the fact that the mother, is really plugged in, if you will, to the daughter.
Right.
So that's the mother-daughter relationship. And when we move into, a primary relationship, a partnership, a lot of times the weaker, maybe, or less developed, will connect with the maybe stronger and more developed, again, to fulfill those urges, or the right word, but to fulfill that kind of bond, where someone who wants to control another, someone who wants to be the lead, hooks up with someone who's a little less developed and a little weaker. And the APA, right, they talk about a pathological addiction, so alcoholism or gambling, where the partner, again, feels like the weaker person and that other person is stronger, and even the addiction adds like a strength and another dimension of strength. At least the perception.
Yeah, can you say more about that?
So in other words, if someone is an alcoholic and a person comes into that relationship with the sense of self that's either undeveloped, weak, or has a distortion, because we didn't really talk about distortions. And distortions I like to talk about are like, I'm not worthy, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, or I don't deserve. So these are some very common distortions, especially among women. And so a woman who comes in and says, I'm not enough, or I'm not good enough, the person who has the addiction is providing, this kind of mirror, and she's saying, yeah, well, I don't deserve better anyway, or, I'm not worthy anyway. I'm not going to find anyone better than this. It's that type of thing.
Right. And also, I'm aware and like reminded of my patients who have said like, I'm not enough for them to stop. Right.
Well,
so even like the addiction, like gets like caught into the distortion.
Yes.
Right. Because if I were enough, they would quit. It's like, oh man, like we just dig ourselves a grave.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And that goes back to that caretaking piece as well, and identity, right? Whereas if you have ego strength within your identity, you wouldn't feel like you needed to fix somebody, or that you should fix somebody. And these shoulds are a big part, again, of women's issues. We have a lot of shoulds put on us. We should do this, we should do that. And that feeling of she's kind of got a savior issue there. Like if she can save him, then she'll be enough.
Right. Yeah. Me and all my previous codependent relationships, just like, I will save you. Where's this here?
What's interesting about that is that sense of I will save you, if I save you, is a bid for identity. It's a bid for individuation. It's a bid for you to say, hey, if I can do this, then I have a stronger sense of self. Then I know who I am. I have something to connect to. And that's part of the bid for identity. Yeah.
Right. Just like fortunately and unfortunately, it doesn't work. And then,
No.
Hopefully,
because it's not authentic.
Right.
And you asked about individuation, and that is that pursuit of authentic self. Individuation is that aspect of ourself of saying, okay, I'm going to find out who I am. I'm going to find out what makes me tick. I'm going to go within.
Yes. Well, yeah, I think we started to mention individuation, but can you expand on, or just compare and contrast that with codependency?
And that's, and I was thinking when I was preparing for this talk, codependency can be an experience that we have while we're trying to individuate. all of these experiences that we have from, again, even prenatal to present day are meant for us to explore and experience, to find out what does work for us versus what doesn't work for us. And if we can view this again like a path, we're on a path of self-discovery. And unfortunately, a lot of times we learn through what's painful, right? As opposed to what brings us joy, we're going to keep doing that. No, a lot of times we're learning through pain, and we experience that pain and we say, okay, something has to stop, or we experience it through illness. So I've had many clients who they just reach a breaking point.
Right.
So, yeah. Interdependence. So interdependence is what we're striving for in relationship.
Right.
And that's when two people in a relationship are sufficiently developed within their own identities, they've developed independent of one another. And then they come together. And then, of course, what happens in relationships, especially with people who have their own identities, they don't always agree. Right? In codependent relationships, typically you have someone who's completely agreeing and going along, or not completely, but often, and then when you have an interdependent relationship or you're striving for that, there'll be conflict because we're each bringing, a whole host of experiences from our past. Right. But if we can work through those in partnership, there's so much opportunity for healing.
So would you say the goal or ideal would be to journey on one's individual road of individuation and then meet someone on their own individuation path and then form this
it's different for everyone.
Yeah,
it's different for everyone. And I go back to attachment. There are types that kind of connect and then types who kind of push apart. But yeah, so and to your point, because you were asking about my personal experience with codependency, I was an avoidant attachment style. And so that meant, it's insecure avoidance. So that meant my early experiences didn't really facilitate connection. And so I kind of was pushing against or rebelling against relationships because there's a sense of not wanting to be vulnerable because it didn't feel safe. There was nowhere for it to land. So that was the avoidance style. So then there's secure attachment, right? Where your needs were met well enough, right? Winnicott calls it, the good enough mother. So your needs were met well enough that you can function and you can build, satisfying, healthy, functional relationships. So secures and avoidance don't necessarily, they won't make it. Yeah, they'll be repellent toward one another. But ambivalence and avoidance may try to get together, ambivalence and secure may try and get together. And in that case, if you've got someone with secure attachment and that experience, and they can be there for someone who's ambivalent or even an avoidant, if they're lucky, you can start to build, what feels healthy. But it is challenging. Relationships are challenging. And so it's even through our experiences of our relationships that we can develop skills and resources, resiliency. But for some people, maybe doing that work of self-discovery before you get involved, because then you'll attract someone who is at a higher level.
Right. Totally.
So it's like, go into this with a full pie, right? Not we're a quarter of the pie, half a piece of pie, and then someone else is going to put in their pie piece.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved me an avoidant boyfriend back in my 20s. I was more insecure, but kind of more like insecure avoidant. Like I could be avoidant. But I tended to lean at least into intimate, dating, romantic relationships. Oh my gosh, these guys, they were so avoidant, Jackie.
I'm sorry.
But it was this push-pull because
Yes.
we made a good, we hobbled along together. And yeah, I would say thankfully I was able to take some time and go to therapy and do some work. I definitely was not cured of that when I met my now husband. But yeah, he is not he does not have the same tendencies or attachment, thankfully, as those former exes. But yeah, we were just those avoidance and we were two peas in a pod.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry that that was your experience, and I'm happy that you've been able to work through it. What I think is important to say about that is, one, again, when we're underdeveloped as women, we're kind of going into a relationship wanting to be filled up. And we'll give ourselves away in order to have that feeling of being fulfilled, even though it never quite feels right, right? But the other piece to this is it feels familiar when our insecure attachment style, since we've been raised in that, again, even, prenatally to our current family system, it feels so familiar. And as you shared earlier, feeling like we can get a sense of identity if they just change, if they just love me. And a lot of times that's connected to our family. We're really, projecting this need or want onto our partner, which what we really want it from our family. If I can just X, Y, Z, then maybe I'll be loved. And I feel like that's at the root of all of it. We don't talk about love a lot in psychology, but to me, it's like it's the foundation of all of it. We all just want to be loved, even the avoidance.
Yeah.
Just don't know how, right?
Yeah. No, I can't remember if I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but reflecting back, I remember growing up sometimes my parents, they would be having conflict or tension in their marriage. And for understanding reasons, my mom, she wouldn't wear her wedding ring. Right. And who knows what the symbolism and meaning of that. And so if they weren't getting along, she wouldn't wear it. But right, that had a lot of symbolism and meaning for me. And so I remember I had an ex-boyfriend, and we created these bracelets. And like he had one and I had one. And I remember like he went out partying with his friends one night, and they posted pictures on Facebook, and maybe he was wearing a tank top. So it was like very obvious that he wasn't wearing the bracelet. And like that same feeling, like I saw him not wearing the bracelet, and it was that same insecurity, right, from before. And yeah, I remember like we had a big fight about it. And I was like always checking for that bracelet, either when I was with him or when we were apart. So yeah, I totally agree that it does go back, and then it's important to reflect on, trying to find the familiarity, trying to find the similarities to work through that. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, and I'm sorry that was your experience. It's painful, but even when we have an insecure attachment type, we're consistently having it, validated. We're consistently having it reaffirmed. Because it's familiar, stepping out of that feels scary. And a lot of this is unconscious. This is taking place at the unconscious level. We're not consciously doing this. But Marissa, I would, put forward that was a trauma point for you, that your mother taking the ring off was reinforcing the fact that this was conditional. Now, what's important about this is it appeared conditional. Did your parents did ultimately divorce, or they stayed together?
50 years anniversary this 2023. Yeah, so they're going strong.
Because I just had this conversation with a client who's also been married for 50 years. And, we talked about the quality of the relationship, and he said, well, it's conditional. And it's like, you've been married for 50 years. What? Wait. It appears unconditional. It was, I mean, it appeared conditional, but it was unconditional. So even the appearance makes us feel insecure.
Right.
It's meant to, right? Your mom taking the ring off was meant to send a signal to your dad. Hey, look, this is conditional. But for you, you're taking this in going, hey, this may all, blow up.
Right.
I'm not ever going to feel safe. We can't be vulnerable and in a relationship. We can't be authentic without being vulnerable. We can't be vulnerable if we don't feel safe. Creating safety is the whole basis for any of this work.
Right.
Whether it's with a therapist or with a partner or for ourselves.
Right.
We're never going to look within if we don't feel safe.
Right. Or all three. All three. Well, I mean, eventually it's hopefully all three, with ourselves, with a therapist, with a partner. Okay. So how do you help your clients work towards individuation?
You know what I find mostly, Marissa, and you may have experienced this as well with your clients, that it's the distortions, right? And what I mean by those distortions are, these dark parts of ourselves that we think are true, and they're really not. They're really the opposite of the truth, but we think, we're unlovable, we're not enough, we're unworthy, we're not, any of those, we're not worthy and not enough. I used to call those my three stooges. I'm not worthy, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough. And so whenever we have these underlying distortions, and again, these are largely unconscious thoughts, and that's why it's important to, but they still can manipulate our behavior. We're still, acting unconsciously in our pattern. But this is why it's important to kind of stop the chatter of the world and be able to go within and say, I'm really anxious right now. I'm really upset right now. I'm angry. I'm depressed. Why? What's causing that within me? And so I think first and foremost, as a therapist, it's challenging those distortions. I had a client a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about an event. And so she, and insecurity. And she would say, well, I would, go and disappear. I would, pull away from the situation. And then we talked about the fears. And she said, she's talking about fear. And I said, well, what happened? What really happened? And she's like, nothing. I'm like, no, nothing. Right. And it was this moment of saying, okay, I am safe. So it's about being able to find that safety. So as a therapist, it's challenging those distortions. I'm not good enough. I'm not enough. I'm unworthy. I'm not smart enough. I've had, and I'm ugly. I've had, I'm unlovable is a big one. Right. Challenging those distortions, creating safety for the client, and then, evaluating what's really going on here, what's really being said, what's not being said. And breath work. I do a lot of breath work with clients. And that's a way to kind of go in, find those distortions, and then actually move them out with the breath.
Wow.
So breathing in, I am worthy, breathing out, unworthy. And as we're working with the breath, we bring it in and try and get to those unconscious distortions, and then shift them. And we can shift them even neurologically. And then that changes your whole field, right? In like metaphysics, they talk about your attractor field and the secret, if any of your clients have heard about that. And really what this is it's just like, when you walk into a room, the quality of the room, right? Walking into a wedding versus walking into a funeral, very vastly different. Well, we're also carrying, an energetic vibration of ourselves, and that's bumping up against other people. So it's not just, are you smiling and are you attractive, but what does that person feel like? Do they feel safe? And so, kind of working with this energy to shift it to feeling good inside and out.
Right.
And then, then we're talking about wholeness, right? Which is part of individuation.
I can assume why, but how is wholeness part of individuation?
Because the wholeness is, we've looked at the parts of ourselves, we've explored these parts of ourselves, and we see, we experience the safety, and we see where it's safe to pull back to ourselves. We see where it's safe to have boundaries. We're in Gestalt, they call it awareness of awareness. We're aware of our feelings. We're aware of how we're behaving, how we're performing. So it's a lot of that.
And going back to the metaphor of the sprained ankle, right? Through challenging these distortions, creating safety, evaluating what's going on or being unsaid, using breath work, shifting energy, right? Cultivating wholeness. Yeah, do you sense like what is underdeveloped gets developed and we're able to walk on our own 2 feet?
Comfortably. Comfortably.
Yeah. That sounds amazing.
It's a process. And it doesn't happen overnight, right? I always say we live in fast food nation and we expect to put in our order, drive around to the window and get our bag of food. This doesn't work like that. It takes time. And and again, it's a process. And so I was saying, even from prenatal to present day, it's a process. We have early experiences and then other experiences accumulate on top of them. And it's important to be able to unravel all of that. Right. But it doesn't have to be that difficult, and it doesn't have to be, that challenging. But if you recalled going through the initial experience and then everything that was on top of it and realizing that to pull that string, it's going to take some commitment and some effort, but the rewards, right, Marissa, the rewards are, you're a whole different person. And that ability to set those crutches aside and say, I'm me, this is who I am. This is what I would like. This is what I feel like I deserve. This is what I want to do.
Right.
And we're not, hobbling along. Someone isn't keeping us stuck.
Yeah. So last question. We can all assume it is important to live our authentic selves. In your opinion, why is it important? And how can we start to do that?
Yeah, one of the other things I do when I work with clients is I teach them, use the word teach, like, I teach them to stop, look, listen, and feel their feelings. So you remember as kids, we're taught about traffic, stop, look, listen before you cross the street. It's the same thing with our feelings. We have to stop, look, feel our feelings and trace them back. So once again, we don't have all this outside of us vying for our attention all the time. And we can look at our responses again, whether it's tears and sadness or anger, whatever our reactions are, right, to activations or triggers in life, when we can pull ourselves in and say, okay, like you said, you had a similar sensation with your partner. He, took off the bracelet, and this you went right back to your experience as a child with your mom, and what that was, linking to you is conditional. This is conditional. I can't trust, right? I can't trust mom in that way. I can't trust my partner. So to be able to stop and take a breath and say, okay, before I start a fight with him, I can stop and trace this back and say, wow, what's really coming up for me now is that feeling I felt, and I don't feel safe. And then being able to explain to him, which requires women finding their voice, which is a whole other aspect of codependency and dependency and individuation, is for us to find our voice and speak our truth, be able to say to our partner, wow, I noticed you didn't have the bracelet on and I felt really insecure. And the reason I feel insecure, why this is so hurtful to me, using I statements, I feel, and then saying, is because, my mom used to take her ring off. And this was always very upsetting to me. And I didn't know what was going to happen next or whatever. And then your partner, right, if he is, a functional partner, a healthy partner and a good partner, would go, wow, it got wet and I didn't like the feeling of it. Somebody spilled beer on it or whatever. Or he's like, yeah, I'm sorry, and there's some guilt here or whatever. But at least as women, and this is so important, and what's beautiful again about this time period is we're seeing a lot of women now who are able to come forward and speak their truth. And then you can decipher whether or not you're with the right partner.
Right.
You can share those I statements and share those feelings, and then you can take it from there. And that's the wholeness, and that's the individuation at work. When we're able to, in our relationship, speak our truth, or in politics, or on the world stage, wherever, because now we've really stepped up, be able to do this and get the response so that we know what to do next.
Right. What would you say to the listener who may be at that point and yet she hesitates to explain because she's worried it won't go well, and her partner may display how they're not an ideal match, or a friend might dismiss what she says? How do you help people with the reluctance or hesitation to explain?
It's a process. Again, I go back to that fast food analogy and those shoulds, that women experience. You should tell him, you should do this, you should do that. It's a process. It's about understanding, wow, I feel like I can't even go to him with this. That's like a giant red flag, right? But again, it's complex. You may have children with him. You may have, financial dependence on him. And so you feel stuck. And then what happens with women is they repress all this, and then it comes out in other ways, in food or wine or a myriad of other unhealthy ways. But the first step, again, is always awareness. Even if you can't at that time go and say something, it's awareness. It's about saying, wow, I can't even talk to him about this. Or in the friendship example, if you say, wow, I know I can't tell her this, but this is how I really feel. And that's when we begin to slowly evaluate where we are and discover what isn't working. So with a client has some dependency issues in terms of, finances or children, marriage, and she knows she can't go to the husband, this is about her discovering, what can she do?
Okay.
What is a healthy avenue for her? Working through it in therapy, right, will help her to find those strong places within herself, find that strength within herself, so that at least she knows she has options. She knows that she can count on herself. What does that look like, or what action will she take? That's going to be up to her. But at least she can find that strength. so that she can rely on herself and not feel like she has to stuff her feelings or, do something else. She can be with herself. And again, that's mainly what we're talking about here, is finding that comfort level within our own selves, finding that comfort level in our own skin, being able to be with ourselves and feel good about that. Because once we can do that, once we can be with ourselves and feel good about that, we can tackle pretty much anything with time.
I agree. Well, Jackie, this has been delightful.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
And if people are curious to hear more about you, I know you offer some groups, individual therapy. So where can they find you?
So I'm on Psychology Today under Jacqueline Schreiber. I do run a women's group. And this is for women to come together and kind of, in a supportive setting, talk about, their family situation, their little T trauma. It's an empowerment group. And then my email address is Jackie Schreiber Therapy @gmail.com, and it's JACKI Schreiber Therapy @gmail.com.
Okay. I will put links to your Psychology Today profile and your email in the show notes. So if anyone's curious, look Jackie up or reach out to her. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Marissa. It was really a pleasure.
All right, everyone. Oh, go ahead.
To meeting with you again at some point.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, for listening. I hope you have a great week, and we will see you next week.
Take care.
Hey, girl. It's Marissa again. I'm not like a regular podcaster. I'm a cool podcaster, right? Thank you for listening and staying till the end. You can find me on Instagram @therapywithmarissa. Email me, marissa@codependummy.com. Check out codependummy.com for more information on the show. And baby girl, a subscribe, rating, and review would be much appreciated. Till next time, I want you to remember, if you are feeling unseen, I see you. If you are feeling unheard, I hear you. And if you think that you don't matter, know that you matter to me. I want you to go out there so you can stop playing small and start taking up space, you dummy. And now, the disclaimer. Girl, this is not therapy, and I am not your therapist. This podcast is designed to provide accurate and authoritative information in regards to the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the host, publisher, or guests are rendering any legal, clinical, or other professional service. If you want or need a professional, please find one.